Hi, folks. Jacob here. Just a quick note before the show. We recorded this podcast on Wednesday afternoon, so that was before CNN broke the story about Graham Platner's old social media posts in which he called himself a communist and had not nice things to say about police and white Americans. So that's why we don't talk about it on today's episode with our special guest. I'm sure we'll get to it in the near future as we continue to cover this Maine Senate race. That's all. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this episode, we head north to the Pine Tree State, where there are highly competitive races brewing for Senate, 2nd District Representative, and for Governor. And we'll do it all with special guest Alex Seitz-Wald of the Midcoast Villager. Buckle up. I'm Jacob Rubashkin, Deputy Editor of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan political analysis for more than 40 years. And I spent the weekend picking apples in lovely Potomac, Maryland, in the 8th Congressional District, represented by Democrat Jamie Raskin.
And I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections, and we went to Montpelier Farms, just outside of D.C., but to the southeast in Maryland, Maryland's 4th District, represented by Glenn Ivey.
Also apple picking, or just on a farming trip?
We thought it was going to be a corn maze. We've been there before, but when we actually arrived at the maze, M-A-Z-E, I would say the M-A-I-Z-E, there was lacking. It was very short. You could look out, you could see everyone who was walking through the field because the corn was not tall. And they had a sign at the maze that kind of apologized for it, but you know, that sign maybe could have been before you pay $25 a person to get there. So I don't know. We still had fun. They have other activities. I want to be sympathetic, but it was a little jarring. Jarring.
You don't need a ball of string to find your way out of that one.
You just have to look up. I don't know. But it also kind of made you overconfident. You still had to kind of walk through unless you're just going to plow through through it. Well, one thing I do like about their shirts, their staff shirts, say on the front of it just says "Get Lost," which I think is very clever for what it is. So I every year we go, I shout out to them for that slogan.
Before we get into it, what are some recent headlines that people shouldn't miss?
Well, it looks like Republicans in Kansas are going to try and get into the redistricting game and try to gain a seat by defeating Democratic Representative Sharice Davids in the 3rd District. Republicans have basically given up trying to defeat her under the current lines, so they might be trying to redraw the new lines to make it more interesting. Now, she has floated interest in the Senate race if Republicans mess with her district, which could be good news for House Republicans, but could be a headache for Senate Republicans, where she would be challenging Senator Roger Marshall.
Yeah, and we'll see if Kansas Republicans can ultimately muster the votes there. They've started the process, but a long way to go to redraw those maps. It's a different story, however, in North Carolina, where the GOP-dominated state legislature has announced it will attempt to redraw their own congressional map to give Republicans another pickup opportunity. This comes just 2 years after the state legislature gerrymandered that map to give Republicans the opportunity to flip 3 seats, which they did in the 2024 election, turning the map from an even 7-7 split to a 10-4 Republican majority. This time, the plan is to try and make Congressman Don Davis, a Democrat from Eastern North Carolina, even more vulnerable. If successful, this would be North Carolina's 5th congressional map in 10 years, which must be a record in terms of the number of congressional maps used by a state over the course of a decade.
3 laws of life: death, taxes, and North Carolina redrawing their lines before each election.
Yeah.
A little off of our regular beat, but Helena Moreno was elected mayor of New Orleans recently. That name stuck out to me because she lost a close primary to Democrat Bill Jefferson in Louisiana's 2nd District back in 2008. This was after the FBI found $90,000 cash in his freezer. He ended up losing the general election to a Republican, Joseph On Cow, even though it's a very Democratic district. But so anyway, that name stuck out to me. So she ended up landing on her feet after a tough loss, a decade plus ago.
Yeah, Moreno also was talked about as a potential candidate for the congressional district left by Cedric Richmond in Louisiana, the seat that Jefferson had, but decided not to run for that seat, now won by Troy Carter, and focus with kind of a longer vision on her local political career. And that got borne out with this pretty dominant win for New Orleans mayor just a couple days ago. Finally, former Congressman Rod Blum ended his brief comeback bid for Iowa's 2nd congressional district. The two-term congressman who won an upset victory in 2014 and won again in 2016 before losing a third re-election in 2018 had been seeking the nomination to succeed Congresswoman Ashley Hinson, who is running for Senate. But Blum did not have very many fans in the Washington, D.C. Republican set, and it became clear he wasn't gaining traction in that campaign, and so he dropped out. I want to welcome our special guest, Alex Seitz-Wald. Alex is currently the deputy editor of the Midcoast Villager in Camden, Maine, and was previously a political reporter at NBC News and, like many of our guests on the show, also at the National Journal. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. A long time listener, first time interviewer.
Well, we're so happy to have you on a very momentous week in Maine politics. But before we get into all of that, you know the drill. We got to know, what congressional district did you grow up in?
Yeah, it was always Henry Waxman's district for me, and I got to meet him on a 5th grade trip to Washington, D.C. It's the 36th district of California. Ted Lieu's now, Santa Monica, California. Very different part of the country than where I am now.
Yeah, and when you were growing up in Santa Monica, California, did you ever imagine that one day you would be helping lead a small local newsroom in Maine on the other side of the country?
Definitely not. Journalism was kind of late for me in college, and Maine was a far off land in the foggy unknowns of basically Canada. I think I was vaguely aware that lobsters existed, but didn't find Maine and didn't find journalism until later. But I am very happy to have ended up here. I will say I did always pine for seasons growing up in Southern California. 72 and sunny, it's wonderful, but I missed, even though I never really had them, I like, it was faux nostalgia for seasons, and I love seasons. So
it was a hard. Did your high school have hallways, or was it all outdoors?
It was a mix. We could see the ocean and the palm trees. It was tough. It was really a hard time there.
And what did you think you would be doing? Even before, when you were young, what did you think you would be doing for a living?
I had about 6 million ideas. I still do. I've maybe narrowed those down to like 2 or 3 million for what I want to be when I grow up. But it was LA. My mom was in the entertainment industry, so I always was interested in film directing. I had a very brief stint as a child actor because a guy just came up to me in a crowd and was like, "Hey kid, do you want to be in movies?" Turned out he was not a predator, but an actual real live agent. So welcome to Hollywood. And I had one small part in a movie. So that for a while, I thought acting would be something that I would want to do.
What movie?
Yeah, you got to tell us now.
It's called House Arrest. It's Jamie Lee Curtis, Kevin Pollak, Wally Shaw. It's a good cast. Not a great movie, unfortunately. I still get like 84-cent residual checks in the mail every so often, which is delightful. But yeah, very cool experience. I hated auditioning and being around all the like stage kids and stage moms who just lived for this. Like they just needed to be on stage. That was not me. I liked the behind the camera stuff. So in high school, then I got into like theater tech and building sets and production and all that, which didn't really lead to journalism either. But many interests. I'm a hobby collector. I say.
And I'm so curious before we talk kind of about the politics of Maine and what's going on now. This is a change of pace for you. You spent more than a decade as a political reporter here in Washington, D.C. in the swamp. What drove you to leave that line of work and move to this small town in Maine, and tell us a little bit about what you and the Midcoast Villager are hoping to accomplish on the local news scene at what is, a pretty precarious moment for the industry as a whole, and I think certainly local news specifically.
Yeah, I appreciate the chance to talk about it because I really believe in local news, and it absolutely is in a precipice. I did an absolutely insane thing of giving up a very stable job in media, one of the few left as a political reporter at NBC News, to go to like not only the worst part of the media industry, but perhaps the worst industry in America right now, or at least up there of local news. It's even worse than I thought. The financial picture, like advertising has completely fallen off. 98% of ads or some absurd amount go to Facebook and Google. Subscriptions are down. So we're building other ways to fund local news. So, we're doing philanthropy. That's a lot of people are doing that, but we're trying to not just look for handouts and, be not just be vegetables, but be something that people actually really want to consume and is relevant in their lives, and build a product that does that. So we opened a cafe. That's a place where we can, connect with the community. We hold events there. We're doing a number of live events. We've everything from like storytelling to, housing, more issue-based kind of stuff. And, using both all the tools that are available online, but a beautifully designed, beautiful to handle print newspaper. This one literally just came off the presses. And like, it's so satisfying. We're a weekly. It's so satisfying at the end of the week to get a physical copy of a paper and read it. And there's just like young people my age and younger have responded most aggressively to it. One of the first hires was a photographer, art director. We really wanted to invest in making it like a nice product, the same way people got into vinyl or book sales are back up again, physical media as a kind of antidote. Although, of course, we're going to do all the online stuff too. Personally, I got here for very personal reasons. My mom has lived here for a long time. She got sick in 2021, and I'd always kind of dreamed about moving to Maine, and my wife was on board. And so I was going back and forth, and I was working remote anyway for NBC. So we moved up here in 2022. And then I kept working, doing my other job for NBC, kind of living two lives up here for 2 years, working remotely. And NBC was great. They were really supportive. But when the Villagers started up, I just got coffee with them because I was just curious, what the local paper in my backyard. And when they laid out the vision, and I saw not just the first issue, but everyone can do a first issue well, but the second and the third issue and how good it was, I was just blown away. And I thought this was like really state of the art chance to do something cool and maybe make a model that can, help local journalism in these little towns in Maine.
And I'm curious kind of what area the paper covers right now, what the plan is longer term, because I know it's five newspapers, the legacy of 5 newspapers that is being kind of adapted by and adopted by the Midcoast Villager. And I just, to think that like, these kind of small parts of the country used to be able to support multiple daily, you had a morning paper, an evening paper, a weekly, and alt weekly. So how big is the reach right now, and what's the long-term vision, or even the intermediate term vision for what this might be able to become?
Yeah. So we're cover Midcoast Maine, which is basically, depends how you define it, but the middle of the coast of Maine. We define that as Knox and Waldo counties. It's about Bucksport to Damerscott, if you know your Maine coastal geography. And yeah, there were 5 newspapers that covered those towns and cities. There were many more before that, but these were the ones that our owner had previously owned. This guy Reed Brower, who at previously owned the Portland Press Herald. There was a moment where he owned almost every newspaper in the state. He sold all of those or most of them, to a nonprofit, the Maine Trust for Local News. And so he could return his focus here. He's a local guy. He's a super committed to the community kind of guy. And there was a kind of a question of like, okay, do we shut down these 4 or 5 struggling papers that aren't making any money, or do we try to take a big swing and save them? And I'm so glad they did. In terms of like the long-term vision, I think we're just trying to make it work here. And it does seem like a place that if you could make it work anywhere, it could be here. It's rural, but there's some affluence. It's very community-minded, most community-minded place that I've ever lived. Like, people are involved in civic groups. They care. Voter turnout is high. Literacy rates are high. People read. So it's a place that should support and is interested in supporting good, high quality local journalism. The concern, because the corollary is if we can't make it work here, then I worry about where it could work, because we have so much going for us. And there's just amazing stories to be told here. I mean, it's an incredible place that attracts lots of interesting people and has for a long time. So there's history, there's politics, there's culture, there's economics, there's deep arts and literary scene. There's just so many amazing stories to tell here.
And it's the center of the political universe.
And by the way, yeah, which I did not expect. I should say, like, I was like, oh, this will be a break from politics, and then politics came chasing right after me.
Yeah, exactly. That was a fortuitous hire on their part, and I hope you aren't too dead set on escaping the political scene, because kind of at every level, we're seeing Maine right at the center of the fight for the Senate, for the House, and pretty interesting gubernatorial race as well. All of which we'd love to talk to you about.
Let's do it. I'm
right.
ready. It's different when I was living in DC for forever, where your vote doesn't matter. I was a registered independent, so my vote literally never mattered. And it feels so different covering politics when your actual constituent. I'm a voter in Maine's 2nd congressional district, one of the top battlegrounds. I was just at a Graham Platner event that is our favorite pizza restaurant that I go to with my daughter all the time. There was 1,000 people there. So it just feels so different when it's you're embedded in the community versus just parachuting in.
When the President of the United States confronted me, we stood up to Trump and stopped him from cutting the school lunch program for Maine kids. But there are too many politicians in Washington, including Susan Collins.
Susan Collins, we want to thank.
Who've forgotten their principles and let bullies like Trump have their way. And it's hurting Maine people. I've never backed down from a bully, and I never will. Honestly, if this president and this Congress were doing things that were even remotely acceptable, I wouldn't be running for the U.S. Senate.
That was Maine Governor Janet Mills, who this week announced her campaign for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Republican Susan Collins. But Mills, who is term limited in her current role as governor, can't focus entirely on Collins just quite yet, because she's entering a Democratic primary with a few candidates who didn't wait for her to make a decision on whether or not to run. Most notably, oyster farmer and veteran Graham Platner has captured a ton of national attention and raised several $1 million despite being a political newcomer. Now, Alex, we like to tell ourselves all the time that Twitter is not real life. So tell us, what has the reaction on the ground in Maine been to Janet Mills's Senate launch?
The reaction has been positive. She's gotten definitely some positive feedback. She's the strongest candidate in terms of, you ask any elected, not any elected official, but the big time elected officials, the big money in DC, obviously. She's won twice. And Democrats here really want to just win. It reminds me a lot of the conversations that Democrats had in the 2020 presidential primary, where it was like, yeah, I like you fine, but I don't care. I just want somebody who will win. They feel so burned after 2020, when Democrats ran Sarah Gideon, turned out to be a not very strong candidate, raised a ton of money, outspent Janet Mills more than 2-1, and still lost by 9 percentage points. So I think a lot of this debate in the Democratic primary is going to come down to electability and the candidates positioning themselves about who's strongest to beat Collins. That's definitely the Mills angle. She's in her video, she's talking about Trump. She's talking about resistance. She's, let me be the challenger. And Platner's doing this whole other thing of a more Bernie kind of message, building a movement, outsider, changing politics. He doesn't talk about Trump hardly at all. We'll see about Mills's deeper resonance, but the Platner enthusiasm is very real on the ground here. I mean, I was at an event with 1,000 people at our favorite pizza place. There are street signs, yard signs everywhere. There are no other yard signs for the 2026 elections. I only see Platner yard signs. I mean, we're super early. And I'm in the next county over. It's spiritually very similar to his county. So, maybe it could just be our area. But I've detected an enormous amount of energy for Platner and definitely some enthusiasm for Mills, but a lot of questions too. People concerned about her age, concerned about her, her record and everything coming up being used back to get her. But if she can convince Democrats that she can win, that she is best positioned to beat Susan Collins, I think that could easily carry the day for her.
In general, in my life, I try to avoid talking about women and their ages, but here we are live on a podcast and I'm about to do it. But it's unavoidable when we're talking about Mills because Mills is 77, but she fits into a recruitment class of Senate candidates who are older, if we're candid. Roy Cooper in North Carolina, former governor, 68 years old. Former Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown is 72 years old. So it's clear that DC is looking for the more traditional profile of candidate, but yet it seems like Mills in Maine has a very real primary against Platner for the reasons that you laid out, Alex, and it's not just going to be her waltzing to the nomination.
Yeah, definitely not. I think she, for all her advantages, the only Democrat to win statewide twice. A Democratic senator has not won Maine since I believe 1988, George Mitchell, which is crazy because Angus King is an independent. But it's not as blue a state as people suspect. But for all her advantages, there's also a lot of resentment about this idea that DC is anointing the candidate, is picking the candidate. I can't tell you how many times I've heard about Sarah Gideon's stove, that 10-burner Viking stove that she had behind her in her announcement video, which was just became this shibboleth of how out of touch she was. So, and that's one of Platner's biggest applause lines is when he says, we're not going to let DC choose our candidate. We're going to pick our own candidate. So I think this is absolutely a real primary. And keep in mind, there's ranked choice. This will be the first really competitive Senate primary in Maine with ranked choice that started in 2018. So that will, complicate the way that some of these other candidates in the primary, smaller candidates, Jordan Wood, Dan Cleveland just got out, but there's another woman too. They might stay in longer because they could still be meaningful in the ranked choice process. So it's definitely not going to have a walk. Platner's untested. We don't know a lot about his past. He could flame out. This is a crazy thing to do, to go from unknown to supernova so quickly. But barring some kind of fatal revelation about him, he's raising money. He's got tons of energy. He's got a strong message. I would underestimate him at your own risk.
I appreciated that you guys wrote that article reviewing his oysters. Right, I thought that was a clever, and they got a good review. So. For whatever that's worth. But I do wonder, I mean, you mentioned kind of Mills and the focus on Trump and how Maine is not a deep blue state, but it is a state that votes Democratic at the top of the ticket, has never voted for Donald Trump. But if you go back to 2020, right, Trump loses the state by 9 points. Susan Collins wins at the top of the ticket by 9 points. Now, maybe with ranked choice, that final margin would have been a little bit smaller if you had allocated the minor party candidates. But the point is, she did significantly better than Trump did when they were on the same ticket. And now Trump isn't even on the ticket because it's a midterm election and you've got Susan Collins. So is going against Trump as a way to get to Collins going to be an effective political strategy? And if not, what else do Democrats think is the path toward beating her in a state where she has managed to, succeed where very few other Republicans have for so long?
Yeah, I mean, I think the emphasis on Trump, I think she's very much trying to win a Democratic primary there, right? Like that's the message that is for Democratic primary voters. If you're pissed off about Trump, support me, and I'm going to stick it to him. But the argument that her allies are making behind closed doors to donors, to anyone, and that I think is a compelling one, is the people that keep electing Susan Collins, the meaningful voters, are, simplifying here, but older or middle-aged women, somewhat affluent, maybe registered independents, husbands might be, Democrat or Republican, but these voters who kind of swing back and forth and who will check the box for Biden at the top and then for Collins, they don't like Trump. And so Mills's argument is that an angry, young, bearded guy is not going to win those voters. He's going to turn off those kinds of voters, and that Mills is the right approach. The sort of like suburban women that we've talked about a lot. So I think that ad is also kind of laying the groundwork for that. The thing that unites them, even if these supposed women, feel differently about tax or whatever, taxes, other policies, they don't like Trump. So that's something that they can rally behind. But I thought, with that in mind, I thought it was very clever that Platner's first ad, which he just put out, is older women saying to camera, Janet Mills is too old and should step aside, essentially. He's not saying it, but he's having women say that, going right after that pillar of her electability argument.
Yeah, I think it feels a little sloppy. That's the word that comes to mind, that people are only going to vote for people who look like them. And it's not a big jump to see older white women, in this case, Democratic primary voters, seeing Mills, and maybe there's some similarities there, but saying winning is the most important thing. And if they think Platner, is the best person to win and help Democrats get control of the Senate and all that, it's not a big jump in my mind. So I if that's kind of what Mills, if that's what they're hanging their hat on, it seems like it could be more difficult.
Well, and she'll have all the establishment support, whatever is left of the Democratic establishment. The DSCC, as you guys know, formed a joint fundraising committee with her. I'm sure she'll have big endorsers coming in from out of state. But it's the kind of strategy that would be a layup in a Democratic primary, 6, 8, 10, 12 years ago. And yep. I just don't know if it will this time. Are we in a kind of Tea Party of the left moment where actually, if you have DC's backing and a bunch of people flying in, Cory Booker and Kristen Gillibrand, whoever flying in to stump for you, maybe that actually is kind of a turnoff to some folks. I don't know.
I just kind of a one data point that we have now. Mills launched yesterday, on Tuesday. Today, Wednesday, she announced that she had raised $1 million in her first 24 hours, which you might say, okay, that sounds like a lot. Former Governor Roy Cooper, when he launched in North Carolina months ago, raised $3.4 million in his first 24 hours. And former Senator Sherrod Brown, when he launched in Ohio, raised $3.6 million in his first 24 hours. Neither of them were running against Republicans who anybody knows, right? North Carolina is an open seat, and nobody knows who Michael Whatley, the Republican candidate, is there. And Democratic donors don't know who John Husted is in Ohio. The grassroots is not clamoring for the head of John Husted. Susan Collins is one of the biggest villains of the Democratic national donor base. It's how Sarah Gideon 6 years ago was able to raise $1 bajillion in that campaign. For Mills to, as the sitting governor and as the candidate who has a strong electability argument to make, again, as the only Democrat who's been elected statewide in the state since 2006, for her to only raise $1 million in the first 24 hours, I don't want to sneeze at $1 million, but am I wrong to say that that's kind of in this day and age, a bit of a disappointing first day total?
I think we have to look at the tea leaves. That's all we have right now, and it's certainly not one that I would want. I think you should be disappointed because Collins alone, running against Collins, you see these like no-name candidates who run against AOC or Marjorie Taylor Greene, or these are complete nobodies who have no serious chance of winning, but they raise millions of dollars just because of the candidate that they're running against. Yeah. So you would think that she would be able to raise a lot more money. And there's other, this isn't fatal and it's not that instrumental, but like just other small things. She accidentally tweeted out on Friday her announcement video and then deleted it 2 hours later. And there was an email that went out, an Act Blue page that got created, and they got all pulled down. It's not big time stuff, but it also doesn't inspire a ton of confidence in the candidate that's supposed to be the adult in the room, the professional, the one who's going to come in and, kick electability butt.
If we look at the general election, I want to say that I'm very comfortable with our current tilt Republican rating. I understand that Susan Collins is a Republican running in a state that Harris won in 2024, that Biden won in 2020, but no Democrat has proven that they can beat her. And so I think she has earned a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, and the bar is a little bit higher for Democrats to prove that this time is going to be different. Doesn't mean guaranteed, doesn't mean we won't change the rating at some point during the race, but I do not think this is a toss-up right now.
Completely agree. And I think that a lot of the Democrats who are now very excited about Platner kind of learned the wrong lesson from 2020. The lesson that they learned was don't let DC pick your candidate. I think the real lesson is Susan Collins is really tough. And, you got to better catch her sleeping if you're going to win and have a strong candidate. She comes close to matching Biden and Harris's numbers in those races. There's a lot of people who are legitimately switching sides. It's a state that really prides itself on kind of independent spirit. About a third of voters are unenrolled. We've elected Angus King as an independent. He was elected governor as an independent. So it is a kind of place where people kind of take pride in going across, and there is a Republican that I'll vote for, or vice versa. And Jared Golden has made hay of that in the 2nd congressional district. I completely agree. She doesn't hold public events. You don't see her power out in the world. It's not obvious. There's not, people aren't crying at Susan Collins rallies, but I feel like I talk to somebody every week who just got off the phone with her, or was just texting with Susan, or was just emailing with Susan. And I hear from her staff that she is like a voracious, night owl, emailing and texting and people. So she maintains these deep personal connections in the state. She seems to be totally up to speed on everything going on. I know somebody who was working on, got a request from the New York Times about some story, and then she intervened. She somehow heard about it and said, "Oh, by the way, you should talk to this editor at the New York Times." She just feels like she has her fingers in everywhere, and so people feel like they know her. They feel like she's relevant. And in a small state, 1.3 million people say it's a big small town. Those kind of personal connections really matter, and you'll be willing to vote for somebody you feel like if they're on the other side.
I mean, in Collins, she's, I want to say like a 6th generation Mainer, a 7th generation. I mean, great. Both of her parents were mayors of the town that she grew up in Caribou. This is someone whose roots extend insanely far. And I thought it was interesting, right? Again, speaking about contrasts and kind of the candidate matchup, right? That in her launch video, Governor Mills highlighted the words of her father, Peter Mills, who was also a figure in Maine politics, ultimately served as the U.S. attorney for Maine under the Nixon and Ford administrations. And I think that ultimately this race feels a lot, the Democratic primary feels like you said, it's going to be a lot about these two competing visions of electability, which is to say you have Janet Mills kind of saying, I can appeal to all the same voters that Susan Collins appeals to, those crossover voters, but they'll like me more. and all the things that she has as strengths, long time experience, viewed as a steady hand, deep political roots. I have that too, and I can just edge her out among those swing voters a little bit better. And Platner is saying, toss the whole board off the fishing boat and do something completely different. Run a bartender and pistol shooter who has never run for anything close to a Senate race before, and that's how you beat someone like Collins, who's so deeply entrenched. It's a really fascinating conversation, and I'm so curious how voters are going to come down on this very stark competing visions of electability.
Me too. I'm so fascinated by it. It's really hard to think of a precedent for a Platner because, most of these populist guys who have big national viral moments, they've been elected to office before. They're public figures, they're CEOs, they're a fighter pilot like Amy McGrath. So even if you don't know them, like just being a fighter pilot kind of makes you an instant celebrity. But this guy was a harbor master, 2 seconds ago, totally unknown. And is now this like overnight phenom. The closest I could come up with was like John Ossoff in his House race because he was a total unknown. But Bernie Sanders, who was making a similar argument, had been a senator from Vermont for decades by the time he ran for president. Beto O'Rourke had been a member of Congress for a long time before he ran for president. So I don't know which will win the day, but I think it will be a fascinating debate to have, and those kinds of like I suspect it'll be a little bit of a Maine-off between the three of those because it is a place that those kinds of connections. How many people keep track of how many generations back you go. You're not a real Mainer if you weren't born here, and I will never be a real Mainer. I sometimes people like joke there's a caste system, and there sort of is a soft caste system, and like true Mainers who roots go back. Caribou, where Susan Collins from, that is way out there. She's from a logging family. That is hardcore. People respect the hell out of that. But I don't know which one will carry the day in the end.
Yeah. Well, let's turn our attention north to the 2nd District, talk about a Democrat who has won some tough races in Trump country before, and that is, of course, 2nd District Congressman Jared Golden and his highly competitive reelection campaign.
I'm not running for Congress to get a job. I'm running for Congress to save Maine jobs. I'll help President Trump end waste and fraud and secure our borders. Let's lower the cost of electricity and everyday items by ending Biden's inflation policies. Bring our northern Maine economy back. Help end the woke extremism putting boys in girls' sports. Protect our freedoms like the Second Amendment. Secure our hospitals, which provide much-needed health care. And always protect Social Security and Medicare.
Now, that was former Republican Governor Paul LePage, who is making his second comeback attempt in 4 years, this time angling for the highly competitive 2nd Congressional District. LePage, who served 2 roller coaster terms as governor in the 2010s and often made headlines for his lack of filter and off-color comments, ran for his old job in 2022, but came up short against Janet Mills by 13 points. He did, however, narrowly carry the 2nd Congressional District. What does all this mean for Jared Golden, the Democrat who represents the Trumpiest district of any Democratic House member in the country? And what do we make of Golden's own primary challenge from State Auditor Matt Dunlap? We'll start there with the primary, Alex. How real is this challenge from Dunlap? Is there any chance that Golden actually loses renomination?
I think it's enough to be dangerous. I don't know that that Dunlap could actually deprive Golden of renomination. Golden's team insists their numbers are really strong, but it's exactly what you don't want if you're Jared Golden. I mean, he's already has to fight a rear guard battle against progressives who don't like that how he triangulates on a lot of policy, takes a lot of stances that are sort of intentionally designed to inflame the base. So he is now going to have to actively defend that to a much higher degree while also countering Paul LePage. So I think it's a challenge for him. It distracts from him, but it was inevitable that he was going to have to deal with a restive left. I remember last year at his reelection, going to an event where every single question he wasn't there, but it was an organizer, and every single question was, well, why won't he stand up to Trump on this? Why won't he vote this way? Why won't he call out, whatever? Because the second district is massive. It's one of the most rural. It's one of the whitest in the countries, but it does have some major cities. It has some liberal college towns like Bar Harbor, Ellsworth, Bangor. There's plenty of left-wing progressive voters in the state. A lot of them with pretty big voices and some money. So he's always had to play this careful balance, and now it will just make it a lot trickier for him.
Well, as long as those Democrats vote for Golden in the general election, I mean, this kind of gives Golden a liberal or progressive foil. Like, say, hey, you Republicans are calling me liberal. Well, look at this, compared to this guy, this is the contrast there. And one of the many things, Jacob, I learned from your story, the 3,600 word story you wrote for the last issue of the newsletter, was, Dunlap wants us to be, progressive versus conservative or progressive versus moderate. But Dunlap's record in the state is a little bit mixed. He had that 1 year, right, where he got a good rating with a pro-life group. He's a pro-gun, more pro-gun than most Democrats anywhere, particularly progressive Democrats. And so that contrast to me got a little murkier as I learned more about Dunlap. And it's not as clear-cut as liberal versus conservative.
Right. I think that's the frame that he's looking to do it, because that's what's going to work well to raise online money and get attention. And that's where Golden's team and the DCCC and his allies, that's where they've gone, is by hitting Dunlap from the left. He's not only pro-gun, he used to run the state Sportsman Association. He was the executive director of the Sportsman Association. I think that helps. And I think the bigger point they're trying to make there, they're trying to argue that this is just a guy who's just running for the sake of running. He's run for, 10 offices or whatever it is. He has run for a lot of offices. So they're trying to undercut him as a real threat. And I could see the argument that it's, he get a foil, he can get him out of the way. But I do think he has to worry about not antagonizing progressive voters in his district. Some might stay home.
And what is Dunlap's reputation? I mean, he is the state auditor currently. He had a long tenure as Secretary of State, but both of those are positions elected by the state legislature. They're not actually statewide elected positions. He hasn't been on a ballot in over 20 years. Has he maintained relationships and connections with voters? Do people know who he is, or is he essentially starting from scratch in this primary despite holding a statewide position for the last 2 decades?
I think he's somewhat well known, but definitely not. Who knows their Secretary of State, let alone their state auditor? I do. You guys do, I'm sure, but most voters don't. So I think he has a lot of connections, among the kind of political class, the grass tops, if you will, and he can use that. But he's definitely not anywhere close to a household name or like a known quantity with voters.
Yeah. And looking to the general election here, how are voters taking Paul LePage's second comeback attempt? This is the second time he's moved back from Florida to Maine to run for office. He's never lost the second district, right? He's appeared on the ballot 3 times over the last 16 years. He's won it every time by increasingly narrower margins, but still getting past his Democratic opponent, including in his 2014 reelection campaign, where he was running against the sitting member who represented the second district, Mike Michoud, who he beat pretty soundly in that race in the second district. So how do voters feel about the return of former Governor LePage, and how strong a candidate is he shaping up to be?
I mean, he calls himself Trump before there was Trump. And in Maine, that's totally true. And so Republicans love him for the most part, and Democrats hate him for the most part. In a conservative leaning district. I think it's like all the Republicans that I know were psyched about him running. He's going to raise a ton of money, 100% name ID. All they need to do is get Republicans to turn out, and theoretically, right, they should have more than the other guy. Like in theory, if you add up all the Republicans in the second district and Republican leaning independents, you should have more. So LePage is a guy who should bring home the base, should like maximize your vote. The counter argument that I've heard is that for the exact kind of voters that we were talking about with Dunlap, the kind of progressives who don't like Golden, that maybe having LePage on the other side of the ballot kind of forces their hand, and they're like, oh, fine, I'll support him. So maybe it gives Golden more running room with his base. But either way, I think it's going to be an ugly knockdown, drag out. LePage is like not above a personal attack at all. And Golden is pretty quick on the comeback. So I think it's just going to be like a real nasty slugfest, and I'm so excited.
Yeah. I went back and found Golden's first ever campaign ad when he was running in the primary for his House seat in 2018. Starts out with him standing in a park in Lewiston, where he's from and where LePage is from, and he says, this is the park where Paul LePage said lawmakers like me should be rounded up and executed. And it's like that's how we started in 2018, and now 8 years later, we're finally getting. I think at the time, LePage was very put off by the ad, and he said, I don't. Golden was a fine Marine, but he's a bad legislator, and he's not running for governor, and I'm not running for House, and so I don't know why he's talking about me. And now, of course, Golden's still not running for governor, but LePage is running for the House. So a lot of simmering tension here that may well boil over long before Election Day.
And age has been this common theme throughout this episode, that LePage is 77, Golden is 43. I mean, that's a big contrast as well. And so LePage, he just came off a race. He's run many races before, but you have to see, all right, this is going to be yet another high profile race. How is he as a candidate? And does he get some of the same forgiveness that President Trump gets? I mean, President Trump says things that would just end careers of almost everybody else. Is LePage more like that than the typical Republican, where he can say things that are more provocative and still be politically viable? I think is a key question.
And we should say this is a top tier race, like at least for the Democrats, they don't really see a path to the House without Maine 2, or at least makes things a lot more complicated. So that's why they got particularly frustrated when Dunlap got in the race, because this is really the top of their list.
Before we wrap up, Alex, there's also a pretty competitive gubernatorial race taking place to succeed Mills. The Democratic primary already includes State Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, former State House Speaker Hannah Pingree, former State Senate President Troy Jackson, and Energy Executive Angus King III, who is the son of the current senator and former governor. The Republican side has even more contenders, and they seem to be jumping in every single day, including a pretty prominent family name that just popped up on the radar. Tell us a little bit about who got into this Republican race and who is in a good position to be the nominees here.
Yeah, guess who's back? The Bushes are back and running for governor again. We got a Jonathan, who's a nephew of H.W. and a cousin of W. and Jeb Bush. They held a fundraiser for him at the family's compound in Kennebunkport. His connection to Maine is deeper than that. He started this company, Athena Health, in Belfast, which is within our coverage area, created about 1,000 jobs. He just declared there on their campus, and he just put out his first ad today, which is all about that. And, it's fascinating because it kind of feels like a Republican running who just has been asleep under a rock for the past 15 years or something. It's kind of refreshing to look at his message. It doesn't even acknowledge Trump or anything. It's like from some other political universe. So I have no idea how this will play. Does it still have juice? Is there maybe like a desire to come back around to it in the Republican Party primary? It's way too early to tell, but I am very interested to see where it goes.
And just one final note on the governor's race. What are you hearing about State Representative Laurel Libby, who has made national headlines? She was, I think, censured and censored by the State House, not allowed to talk after some social media posts she made, I think, outing a trans minor. Is she going to run for governor? And if so, is she the kind of candidate who could shake up this field of, guys who have, like Bush, who either seem like kind of the old Republican Party or people who haven't been able to gain as much traction?
Yeah, Libby is sort of like the Michelle Bachmann of Maine. She's been a provocative figure for a while, but this moment was huge. She started the entire trans debate that Maine has been dealing with Trump, and that Mills based her whole launch around. Libby was the one who posted photos online of a trans high school. We're talking about a teenager, high school kid, and identifying the person, a trans athlete. That's what she got censored for, but that's also what kicked off. Provoked Trump to call out Mills, which called her to say, we'll see you in court, which is now the centerpiece of her campaign. So a lot of Republicans want Libby to run. I see signs for her, even though she has not declared. I don't know if she will. It's getting pretty late. I had heard that she was going to hold off this cycle and wait for another, but we'll see whether that proves true.
And this race has made me feel old, because one of the Democratic candidates that we mentioned briefly, Hannah Pingree. I remember when she came to the interview where we interviewed Shelley Pingree when she was running against Susan Collins in 2008. Shelley Pingree ended up losing that race, later getting elected to the 1st district. Hannah ended up getting, even though her mom lost, Hannah got elected to the state house, eventually became the speaker, and now is eventually through a couple other jobs, running for governor. But this is making me feel seeing Hannah Pingree as a gubernatorial candidate is making me feel a little bit old.
Probably the front runner on the Democratic side too.
Now it's time for our final segment, Look What I Found. This is anything we've stumbled across recently that we find interesting. It does not have to be political. It can be a TV show, an album, or something else entirely. You never know what you're going to get. I will kick us off here. I've mentioned this show on the show before, but it is back for its 4th season. It is, of course, Special Forces World's Toughest Test, my favorite reality show on Fox that takes a whole bunch of washed-up celebrities and a whole bunch of really insane former Special Forces operators, take them to a remote location where they subject them to 14 days of simulated Special Forces training, where they make them do all sorts of crazy things like jump off buildings and, hold their breath underwater in a collapsing submarine and things like that. It's trashy, but it's great. This season has Shawn Johnson, the former Olympic gold medalist and gymnast. Johnny Manziel is doing it. Randall Cobb, who they have a funny moment between the two of them where they ask Randall Cobb if he was a better player in the NFL than Johnny Manziel was. Jussie Smollett is on there talking a lot about his whole kind of episode. Cody Brown, who I was unaware of before, but I guess is the star of Sister Wives, is on the show.
One of my favorites.
Nick Young, Swaggy P, formerly of my hometown Washington Wizards, as well as the Golden State Warriors and the Lakers, is on the show as well. It's fun. It's incredibly silly. And I'm so glad that it continues to be renewed for some reason, because I don't know anybody else who's watching it.
Well, I wonder what the lag time is on when they tape versus when it airs, because I could see a politician trying to get on there and literally jump. They might force them to jump the shark. Usually that's metaphor for the happy days. But
Scaramucci was on season 1.
Of course.
I think that's about as political as they've gotten. And Savannah Chrisley, who's another reality star, was on Special Forces and then later spoke at the RNC and floated, put her name out there for the Senate seat that Marsha Blackburn will give up if she's elected governor next year. So we could have some more Special Forces politics crossover events yet to come.
I mean, you could see who's going to try Cory Booker, right? Someone's going to try that. Someone's trying to get on that show.
Yeah. I wouldn't put it past anyone. All right, Alex, what did you find?
There's this great new singer-songwriter. I don't know if you guys heard of her, Taylor Swift. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Swift, maybe. She just put out an album. No, actually, a different singer-songwriter. Although I do like, hot take, I do like the new album. But Michaela Davis, I just saw her at this really cool music festival up here hosted by John Stitrat, who's the bassist from Wilco. He lives here. He has an old boys summer camp that was built in the 1930s that he and his wife purchased and have been refurbishing. And they hold this annual music festival there, which is phenomenal, called Sonic Sleepover. And she played, I had never heard of her before. She's a harpist and she plays with a band, and it's like, it's awesome. It's very cool and highly recommend. Like pop harp, indie pop harp.
Pop harp. Wow.
All right, I've never heard those words used together, but you have me intrigued.
Well, it just makes me think about how the DNC had Maggie Rogers introduce Sarah Gideon at the 2020 virtual convention. So maybe they'd have better I don't know, Michaela Davis's politics. I don't know. Indie pop harp is maybe not giving Republican, but
yeah,
who's to say? We'll see if she shows up at a Graham Platner rally.
I don't know if that's a demo that moves numbers. I don't know if the indie pop harp fans out there are big enough to really be meaningful in an election.
You never know. Close race.
In a slightly different vein, I found a band called Galactic Empire.
Okay.
They play metal versions of Star Wars songs, like the Star Wars soundtracks for various movies in metal versions. It is apparently they dress up. So I've been showing it to my boys who love all things Star Wars. I found that Galactic Empire is playing in Baltimore in November. I may or may not have looked at ticket prices, and we might be making a trek up there. They're playing with a band called Bit Brigade. God, say that 10 times fast, which apparently plays soundtracks of video games. And at this show, they're playing Mega Man 10, like the songs from as the video game is playing on a screen behind them. So I don't know. I'm intrigued. I want to get my boys exposed to, some of the live music stuff. So why not go see metal versions of Star Wars songs?
You got to teach them the canon. They have to learn these important cultural touchstones in Western art.
Yeah. So when the show says all ages, I want to make sure I might be bringing an 8-year-old to this show. What am I going to be, a terrible parent or the best parent in the world? It's probably not going to be in between. It's going to be one or the other.
Well, that sounds right up your alley.
Yes. Well, Alex, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you having on, and we'll make sure to link to everything that you're a part of so people can go check it out.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the bi-weekly newsletter. We've got individual subscriptions and group packages that are tailored for association and corporate PACs. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and rate us on your favorite platform. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment, and subscribe. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Jamie Lee Curtis. We also wanted to thank our producers, Alan Tusinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and associate producer Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us again next time.